evening. So, in some ways, what we're going to talk about tonight is really hopeful. And in some ways, it can suck a little bit. Because what we're talking about really is this idea that we have a great deal of power about how we experience the world. So these are literally unimaginable times. I do a great deal of speaking, and I have one conference down on the Cape that I've been at every year for, I think, 7 years now. And they just met again in person for the first time. I think it was, I don't know, probably in November or so. And so they'd been not in person for 2 or 3 years. And I said, imagine if the last time we were all here together in November 2019, I had said, not for nothing, but if you don't have a lot of toilet paper, you might want to pick some up. I don't know if you have any experience in wearing surgical masks or things like that, but you might want to buy some. And if you ever thought about buying more board games or setting up a pool, this is the time to do it. What would you have thought? And they all said they would have thought that there was something very wrong with me. And yet, 6 months later, the world had changed, and the world continues to change. These times are literally unimaginable in that we could not have explained to you. You couldn't have told me 5 years ago that some of the things that are happening around reproductive health, some of the things that are happening around LGBTQ, some of the things could possibly happen. Some of those things I thought were untouchable. These are unimaginable times, and that is really hard. And so we keep saying to ourselves, okay, when everything gets back to normal, then I can calm down and relax. And what I'm here to tell you is that's never going to happen. It's never going back to what we knew as normal. We will not go back there. And when we look ahead, it's going to continue to struggle. Whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, these next year or so promise to be a whirlwind. Our socioeconomic stuff is really challenging. Health stuff is challenging. Everything is hard. And in some ways, that is super hard. So I say, what the hell happened? It was a global pandemic combined with very public murders of Black people that we could no longer ignore in a really important way, national political upheaval. And one of the things that's really important is that this is a collective experience. So we've had crisis and tragedy in our world. We went through 9/11, we went through Katrina, we went through all of these other things. But the thing that I want you to realize is that all of those things happened to people here. And maybe you were one of those people, but the more likely thing was that you weren't. And there were all these other people who were okay, that could go lend help and go lend support. No one is not a part of what's currently happening. No one is not overwhelmed. No one has escaped this with no impact. And what that means is that the people who used to be the helpers, who used to be the ones that could go in and say, let me help you get back to this, they're also overwhelmed and frustrated. The people that we used to rely on the most, our healthcare systems and things like that, are some of the ones that have been most impacted by this. So what does that mean for us? I also want to acknowledge, the impact on folks, especially in the BIPOC community, and our folks. I want to add the folks that are in the LGBTQ community. Even in the past 2 months since I've last looked at this presentation, it has become a different world for that community, and so I want to acknowledge that. It's like the rocks keep piling up. You can carry a few things, but none of us can carry this without figuring out new strategies, new ideas, new ways to move through. And I think we want to pay attention to that. So how do we move forward? Because is anybody here tired? And tired in kind of a new way. And I think that one of the pieces we need to pay attention to is that it's really frustrating. So Erykah Badu, who's a singer and artist, said, I figured out the reason I couldn't get through the day as well as I can now is because I had too many things on my mind, on my plate for one person. So I started to eliminate some of the things that were too heavy to carry and unnecessary. So my question for you right now is, how long do you want to wait for things to get better before you make a change? Because one of the things that's really, so part of my work is around intentionality. This idea that we get to choose how we move through this environment. Perception is a great deal of it. And so that choice that we're making is really important. How long are you going to wait for things to get better? Just a question. How many of us have moments when we've lost our temper over small things, we feel angry or frustrated and we don't know why? We wish we had more energy and patience for those we love and ourselves. Anybody? Yeah, and so once you've made that decision, that's really powerful. You know, one of the things that I tell people is you deserve to be comfortable in your life. I'm not going to tell you you're going to be blissful all the time, but you deserve, 85% of the time or so, you should be able to say, I'm okay. There's stuff that's there's stuff going on, but I'm okay. And I think that for most of us right now, if I were to ask you every 6 hours or so to note how you were doing, I don't know that we would get to that 85% mark. It's an intense world, and it's an intense place to be in a way that it never has been before. You start to get this feeling. So the question is, how do we check in with ourselves? And it's not something that we're taught to do. We're not taught to check in with ourselves. What I'll often hear people say is, I've been in a bad mood all week. And what we should be doing is checking in with ourselves on a regular basis. So the next person who comes up to me, I say, how are you? And they say, I'm really stressed and overwhelmed. I'm going to say, I'm really sorry to hear that. What are you going to do about it? Because that's that next piece. When you acknowledge that you are struggling, the next step should not be you just saying, well, this is life now. I'm miserable. I'm overwhelmed. I'm frustrated. I yell at my kids. I snap at my significant other. I'm unhappy in the car. Once you decide that you are struggling, the next step has to be, what are you going to do about that? And the really good news is that you have a great deal of control over that piece. So the first question is, how do we check in with ourselves? Where are we? So how do you check in with yourselves? I often say I used to wear a bracelet that vibrated every hour. So every hour I would stop myself and say, what am I thinking? Is it useful? Is it not useful? What am I going to do with it? You ever had a day when you spent the whole day worrying about something? Not something you could do anything about, not something that was going to play itself out anytime soon. Just spent the whole day ruminating over something, chewing on it. And it's completely useless. It's exhausting. It in no way helps the problem. All it does is hurt you. But you don't interrupt that process. If you don't interrupt it, you'll do it all day, because we are actually hardwired to continue doing what we're doing. We're also hardwired to look for the negative, and we can talk about that a little bit, but if we don't actively work on it, we're not looking at ourselves. We should really be in that healthy place 85% of the time. I would say that when we're in that, so reacting says irritable, impatient, nervous, sad, displaced sarcasm, procrastination, forgetfulness, trouble sleeping, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, muscle tension, headaches, low energy, decreased activity, regular but controlled alcohol use or gambling. And for many of us, those things, especially, as we've moved through these past couple of years, start to be like, yep, that's me. And so finding out where we go with that is really important. Once you know who you are and how you're doing, then we start to figure out what we're going to do with that. Every single one of us deserves to feel comfortable in our lives about 85% of the time. And I'm going to say that over and over again because it's a really high number. And what a difference it would make if you just think to yourself, like, what would it feel like to be content 85% of the time? What would that feel like? It'd feel good. Yeah, it would feel good. And it is amazing what it would do for your immune system, what it would do for your gut, what it would do for your brain health, because we're actually not created to be stressed 100% of the time. Our brains were not created. Our brains weren't even created to operate in these times. So when we think about how the human brain developed, it wasn't developed to be stressed all the time. So why is this so hard? we're very tired because our brain is working constantly. We used to rely on these long periods of boredom. Things were the same. There was no new input. Matter of fact, 125, 150 years ago, even in Laura Ingalls Wilder's time in the 1800s, Laura Ingalls Wilder writes about being in Little House in the Big Woods and seeing a stranger for the first time at the age of 5. For the first 5 years of her life, she literally experienced no new people. In 1973, only about 3% of kids went to formal school at the age of 4, kindergarten. So where were all those kids? Where? Home, or with the lady at the end of the street, or with Nana, or with Auntie who lived upstairs. And what did they do? What?
Playing with their friends.
Playing with their friends. Yep, there was probably 5 kids that was with the lady at the end of the street. And their day was boring. They got there, they had some breakfast, they went outside for a few hours, they had lunch, maybe they sat down for an hour, they went outside for a little while longer, they had some snack, their parents came and got them, they had dinner, they went to bed. And they did the same thing for years. And that's actually what we're supposed to do. Our brains are supposed to have these long periods of boredom intermingled with occasional kind of impacts, stress or joy. Not the way we currently live. So the intellectual and emotional work we're doing is actually the most tiring work of all. And as I said here, it does not flatten your abs. Don't lose weight. None of those good things happen. Let me tell you, I would be like Gal Gadot at this point if any of this stuff actually did anything for that. So I'm a big believer in understanding how your brain works, because this is brain health. I don't talk about mental health. We don't have a mental. If I asked you to point to your mental, we don't have one. And that doesn't make sense, because when we talk about lung health and heart health and ankle health and kidney health, you can point to those things. You can point to your brain. We all have brains, we all do. And the brain is just as amazing and problem-ridden as any other part of our body. I have very bad ankles. Some of us have bad other stuff going on. And the brain is just another one of those parts of the body that occasionally requires support. It's also highly, highly changeable. So in the same way that when I broke my ankle, I went to physical therapy and I did this 85 million times and my ankle got better, you can look at the parts of your brain that are struggling and you can do therapy of some sort for it and you can make it stronger and better. So the sledding paths are neural pathways. And because we have something called neuroplasticity, we can change the way the neural pathways work. So sledding paths are basically, we've all been sledding, right? Everybody been sledding at some point? Good. So when you go at the top of the hill and you look down and no one else has sledded before you, and you put your sled down, where is that sled going to go down the hill? How is it going to make its path? It's going to go straight, but it's going to hit the bumps, it's going to dwell. So you really don't know where you're going to end up. You could hit a bump over here and end up over here. So those first few times you sled down that hill, you could end up anywhere. But that 20th time you slide down that hill, what do you have? What? A path. When you put that sled down, it's going exactly where that path goes. It's not going anyplace else. That's a neural pathway. It tells us things about the things we like, the things we don't like. Carol, do you like to cook? So if I said to you, oh, you know what, you're going to need to make a meal tomorrow. Your neural pathways would associate cooking with enjoyment. You'd go someplace good. It would be zoop, straight to good. I hate to cook, and I'm terrible at it. If you said, okay, we're going to make a meal tomorrow and you're going to need to cook, my neural pathway would go to stress. So I would immediately have a release of cortisol and adrenaline. Carol might get some oxytocin. That might be part of her love language. She feels good about doing that. I would only have stress. I'm a really bad cook, impressively bad. So that's that first sledding path. Questions on sledding paths and neural pathways? They're magical because it helps to reduce the workload. Anybody ever driven home and not really realized how they got there? Is it different than driving to a brand new place? You don't have to work as hard. When you have to work every single moment, it's overwhelming to your brain. What we lost were a lot of those times where we could just do things by rote. And it's the same, unfortunately, we all kind of hoped things would go back to normal, but it doesn't seem to be happening. So this is what we want. We want to have clear-cut paths that tell us exactly where to go. That's how our brain works best. This is what we currently have. So we wonder why we're tired and overwhelmed. It's because basically every decision and all of the intensity that's happening around us, I will tell you, even the intensity of knowing what everybody thinks about everything. Before, I would say before it was kind of the election 8 years ago, I didn't really know what everybody thought about everything. I didn't know what everybody thought about politics and gun control and pronouns and racism and all these other things. And you know what? I was okay with that. I didn't need to know everything that goes on in everyone's head. And then we went into COVID, lockdown, and people spent a lot of time sharing how they felt about a lot of things. COVID tapped into everything. COVID tapped into race. COVID tapped into economics. COVID tapped into education. There is no part of our life that wasn't impacted by this pandemic and that people weren't really escalated by. And that means that I now run into people in the grocery store that I used to be able to just be like, hey, how are you? And now I have to be like, ooh, I know that you feel this way about, pronouns. I know you feel this way about this, and now I'm uncomfortable and all these other things. Even the most comfortable parts of our lives became less comfortable. That's why we're so tired. And it's our youth as well as our adults. There has never been a more challenging time in history to be a young person. Never. And part of the problem is that I'm 50, my son is 14. There has never been a generation that has raised kids whose lives were so different from their own in history. And it will never happen again unless we start colonizing other planets. And I'm not being sarcastic. The impact of social media, of the internet, of the way that our social environment has changed. So my son is, as I said, he's 13, almost 14. He has never lived in a world where a black man has not been president. He has never lived in a world where men could not marry men and women could not marry women. And now he lives in a world where the laws, etc., are changing so that some of those really promising changes that were made are being taken back faster than they've ever been taken back before. It's a really challenging place to be. It's a challenging place for our young people, but it's a challenging place for us to parent. I will say that I fully expect my kid to be 25 and look at me and go, what were you thinking? And I'm going to go, we did our best, but we really had no idea what was going on. It's this. When no part of it is easy, it's exhausting. So this is Dan Siegel. He's a writer. He writes great stuff. This is me with Dan Siegel. It's a tough crowd. You're not going to laugh. That is the worst Photoshop job anybody has ever done. Can you not see that I just pasted my face there? So Dan Siegel is amazing. And Dan Siegel introduced us to the hand model of the brain. And I would love, my son has known the hand model of the brain since he was 4. He used to go to school and tell me that his amygdala was out all day. So we're going to learn the hand model of the brain. So everybody put your brains up. This is the spinal cord. This is where information comes in. goes in through the spinal cord, and then it hits this area. This is our amygdala. We have two of them. The amygdala is that fight, flight, freeze part of your brain, and your limbic system, which is like the how do I feel about things. And then if we close it, we get to our cortex, and only if it passes all of these other spots does it get to our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of our brain that can think and make good decisions and weigh the consequences of our actions. So when we were cave people, and if you don't believe in cave people, please don't talk to me about it afterwards. I would just go where you need to go with that. But when we were cave people, our job was to be with our friends, hang out, do the same thing every day, but every couple weeks we'd go out and we would hunt or gather, right? So I'd go out and I would hunt, and I'd go out and I'd look around, and I would be very careful, and if I heard a noise in a bush, I could do one of two things. I could assume that whatever's in that bush was going to kill me, and I could run back to the village, or I could think, maybe that's something nice that I could domesticate and enjoy playing with and having fun with. I could name it Rover, and I could go look in the bush. But what might happen to me if I look in the bush? I might be eaten. And in fact, most of the stuff back in that time wanted to eat us. So the people who survived to pass along their genetic code were not the people who stayed calm and hopeful and looked in the bush just to see if it might be something lovely. The people who lived and passed on their genetic code were the people who heard something in a bush, peed themselves, and ran back to the village. That's whose genetic code we have. So we have panic. So my dear friend, Dr. Siegel, kind of says, this is completely calm. This is completely flipped lid. So he simplifies it a lot. The fact of the matter is we are never, almost never, completely here or completely here. We spend most of our time somewhere in between the two, all day long. So we get up in the morning, maybe you get up on time, it's a nice day, so you're here. Oh, but then you didn't have anything for breakfast and you're running a little late, then you get here, then you remember you lost something, then you get here, then you get an email that's nice. This is all we do all day long, and this is our flexibility. But when we don't check in with ourselves, when we allow ourselves to get exhausted and overwhelmed and frustrated, we don't start here, we start here. And what that means is instead of having all of this space to deal with things that are challenging, we just have this. What this means is that when you are driving and there's a rotary, which although we have 9 million of them, no one in Massachusetts seems to know how to navigate any of them. Instead of thinking to yourself, wow, rotaries are tough. Like if you haven't been in a rotary before, I could see where you might be confused about who goes first. Instead, you lean on the horn and you scream out the window, don't slow down, idiot, you have the right of way. Now, I have a question for you. Is there a rule that says the person with the highest blood pressure gets there first? No. It in no way improves our life to get angry at intersections. It in no way improves our life to be at the market basket or Stop and Shop and be counting the number of items in the cart in front of us and getting angry when they have 15 items in the 12 item or less lane. But do we do it? You don't do it. You may not. Do other people do that? Yeah. And then imagine that that person who has 15 items in the 12 item or less lane then takes out a check to pay for them. That's it. That's the end of the road. Like you just are frustrated. And it's not because we're bad people. It's because we were here. And what that means, you ever heard somebody say you're on my last nerve? What that means is that almost anything can be that thing that pushes you over the edge. So our job is to constantly be working to support ourselves to lower that level of stress so we have the flexibility we need to deal with things that are really challenging. And this, I can kind of prove to you that this is the thing. Anybody ever been in an argument with somebody, like a real humdinger of an argument, and you're saying all the things and you're winning the argument? Anybody ever been in that argument? and you hear a tiny voice in the back of your head and it's saying, shut up, shut up. Anybody ever heard the tiny voice? The tiny voice is your prefrontal cortex, trying desperately to get control of your amygdala and limbic system before you do something that you're going to regret. But your amygdala and your limbic system are so much more powerful because that's the keeping you alive part of your brain. And the keeping you alive part of your brain doesn't understand that you're yelling at someone because you're at the DMV and they don't have the right form, not because they have a machete. And the cortisol and adrenaline and all those other things that are released are exactly the same in both situations. Which means that as you are counting the items in line, in the cart of the person in front of you, you're releasing the same hormones that were created so that we could draw blood away from your fingers so that when they were lopped off in battle, you wouldn't bleed as much. It stops your gut from digesting. As we hear lots of gut, everybody has gut issues now. It's stress, it's constant stress. Oxytocin is produced in your gut. When your gut is constantly distressed, you don't get oxytocin. Oxytocin kind of levels out all these other pieces. None of this, I always tell people, I don't talk about anything that's touchy-feely. It's all just science. It's the way our brains were created and formed and developed over the course of centuries, combined with the chemicals and hormones that are released based upon perception, and the impact of our current situation on the way we feel about ourselves and one another. When we combine those things right now, we end up in a very uncomfortable space, unless we are willing to be extremely intentional about the way we move on in healthy ways. Because the ways that we used to get relief, a lot of them don't exist anymore. We're getting back there. But I will tell you, if we had done something like this 3 years ago, we'd have a lot bigger crowd. Still a lot of people who are concerned about going out. A lot of people are feeling very uncomfortable being in public spaces, not just because of COVID, but because of all the other things that are currently happening in the world. So there are no natural opportunities to reduce fear in many of our lives. And because we need that resilience to care for ourselves, we have to intentionally create them because we are really good in a sprint. All of us can deal with crisis, right? Something big happens, you go, like there's a fire in the neighborhood, there's whatever, we go, we help, we fix it, the fire's over, we rebuild, and we're all good and we move forward. We're all good at that. But this is a marathon, and it's not even a normal marathon. Like we just had the Boston Marathon. What is it, 26.2 miles? What if it was like you were running and they were like 12 more miles, and then you went another mile and they were like 27 more miles, and then you went another mile and they were like 2 miles, and they went another mile and they were like 17 miles. How would that be? Would anybody want to run that marathon? That would be horrible. And that's what this is like. We keep thinking, everything's going to be better now. Everything's turning the corner now. It's going to be okay now. Everything is so bizarre. The weather is bizarre. The economy is bizarre. I look around and I keep thinking, it's just an incredibly bizarre time to be a human. There is no settled place. So where we used to be able to rely on, even travel. So it's spring break. I live in New Hampshire. It's spring break. The number of people whose planes did not go where their planes were supposed to go. I feel like 5 years ago, the vast majority of time, you went to the airport, you got on the plane landed where it was supposed to be, and you went on your vacation. Now, it feels like it's like a 70% chance it's not going to work. It's a hard time to be a human, and it's because of this bizarre ultramarathon that we are now in that none of us signed up for. So when we think about an ultramarathon, what we don't think about are the support people. No one is strong enough to get through what we're currently getting through without doing something differently, without looking for supports. So when we think about the people around us who seem like they're doing just fine with nothing, I will tell you that one of two things is happening. Either they're not fine, or they're not doing it alone. Those are the only two ways it works right now. And that's true of youth. You know, those of you who are kind of raising young people or are a young person, when you look around and everybody else seems to be doing fine, social media in many ways is one of the biggest disasters we have ever created. Because it gives us this unbelievably maladaptive view into other people's lives that we compare ourselves to on a day-to-day basis, and it gives us ways to communicate around only the positive things. I have lots of friends who only post when things are positive. So the viewpoint you get when you're having a hard time and you go through this feed is that everybody else's life is beautiful. Everybody else's kitchen is clean. Everybody else's kids are well behaved. Everybody else's dog is good. And so, you know, a friend of mine recently posted a picture of her two daughters. They were baking cookies and everything else. It was the last time it snowed and everything was beautiful and the kitchen was perfect and the cookies were perfect and everything else. And I was like, I was just there yesterday. Yesterday, her kitchen looked like a bomb went off in it. Her kids were beating the snot out of each other, and the only thing she had in the fridge was mustard. So what has changed? And I texted her and I said, what the hell is that picture? And she was like, do you want to see the one I didn't edit? And I was like, I do. And she sent it to me, and it was literally like she had taken her hands and pushed all the stuff on the counter to each side, put the kids on the counter, and taken those cookies that she had sliced up out of something from a thing and put on a plate. Everybody's putting up a front. And that makes it really hard to be a human, because we were developed to live in very small communities where we knew everyone's sorrow, and we knew everyone's joy, and we knew that most of the time things were just fine. But now we have these intimate knowledge of people's joys and almost no knowledge of their sorrows, because we're not connected in communities in the way we used to be. And that's a really hard way to live. It's an incredibly hard way for our young people to live, who've had this for their entire lives. I mean, at least we had some time of reality. So we pay attention to why this is so overwhelming. We were not meant to do this on our own. We were not meant to do this without supports. And I would say most of us can't. Now I'm going to talk about self-care a little bit, and people are going to be like, la, 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 self-care. And I will tell you, I've been writing a book for about 100 years now. And in that book, there's a whole chapter that is called Self-Care is Bullshit. And I say that because I know too many people who have failed at self-care. You go, you get a pedicure, you don't like the color, the whole time you're sitting there, you're like, I don't even really like this place, I can't believe I'm paying $45, then I'm gonna have to give her $8 as a tip, and I don't even have cash, and all these other things, and by the time you leave, you don't feel any better than you did when you got there. You go for a long walk, but the whole time you're walking, you're thinking about problems. And you failed at self-care. Self-care is actually the decision that you are worthy of nurturing yourself. That you deserve to rest, that you deserve peace, that you don't have to earn it, that it's not a waste of time. The number of times that I have sat on the couch and thought to myself, I should really be doing something else right now. I can't believe I'm wasting this whole afternoon. And what is amazing is that we are also the meanest people we know. Because if I called Carol and I said, Carol, I can't believe I wasted a whole day sitting on the couch, what would you say?
Oh, you probably needed it.
You needed it. Think about all the work you've done. You have these kids and these babies and everything else. I'm so glad you got to sit on the couch for, a couple hours. And I would say the same thing to Carol. And you would say the same thing to a stranger. Because we're nicer to strangers than we are to ourselves. And we hold ourselves to higher standards than anybody else can possibly meet. And until we're aware of that, until we get this inner dialogue that says, I can't believe I'm sitting on the couch, and then immediately says, you know what? That's ridiculous. You have worked overtime, you have been running around, you've been doing this, you've been doing that. No one deserves 2 hours of sitting on the couch and listening to a book more than you do. And if you can accept that and say to yourself, you're right, I do deserve this. Then no matter what you do in that 2 hours, that is self-care. But when we do, you have that list of things you can do for self-care, take a bubble bath, do all these other things. When you do it with this feeling that, all right, I'm going to do this and then I'll feel better, you're not going to feel better if you don't truly own that you deserve it. And that's, again, true for every single one of us, including no matter what age you are. So self-care is not about, putting nail polish on an elephant's toes or any of these other things. It's not about a pretty pedicure. Everybody's self-care is different. The things that you enjoy are different. You might be like, I want to cook. I might be like, that would be the worst thing that happened to me. I would like to get takeout. Somebody else wants to go for a walk. Someone else wants to go to the ocean. Someone else wants to go to the mountains. Someone else wants to be alone. Someone else wants to be with people. This person wants to read. This person wants to write. This person wants to do art. If I were to give you 3 hours and say you may do with them whatever you want, but it has to be something that you enjoy, do you know what you would do? Do you know what you would do? That's a huge thing. And we see many, many people who are like, I have no idea what I would do. And when you don't know what you would do, what it means is you're not doing it. All of us should know what we would do with 3 hours. What would we do with a day? What would you do with 2 days that would bring you peace, not bliss? I'm not saying you're going to get on a plane and go to Paris, although you might, and that'll be fabulous. But there are so many things that are accessible, that are near to us, that we can do, that can bring us peace and bring us joy and bring us this. Because if you say to yourself, if I say to you, how are you? And you say, I'm struggling. And I say, what are you going to do about that? And you say, I have no freaking clue. We're in a bad spot. You should know, when I work with folks, you should know what you can do in 1 minute. You should know what you can do in 5 minutes, in half an hour, in an hour, in a day. And you should have access to those. I have a thing of, I've fallen into the TikTok thing. So I have a whole thing of TikTok videos that are very, very funny, that are hidden, that are kind of all put together, that I can watch 1 minute of it or 5 minutes of it. They make me laugh until the tears roll down my face. There's this English guy who reads people's most embarrassing moments, but he's already cackling with laughter before he even starts them. So before he even starts reading, I'm already laughing. And one of them, this is my favorite one, so he comes on, he's already laughing, and he's reading someone's most embarrassing moment, and this person is like, my most embarrassing moment is when I was in London, and I saw that this woman was carrying a hamster, and I love hamsters, and so I followed her for like half a block, and when we got to the light, I went up and I tapped her on the shoulder, and I asked her if I could pat her hamster, but it was actually a bran muffin. To me, hysterical, because I can see myself doing that. That's not your thing. You might find something else, but all of us need to know. I will tell you that I could be having the worst day ever. Listening to him repeat that most embarrassing moment will make me laugh every time. So many of us before 2020 had built rituals in our lives that soothed us without even knowing they were happening. We gathered with friends, we went to concerts, we met up in places, and some of those things are coming back, but some of them may not come back without some real intentionality. You know, I have a friend who used to go to concerts, literally probably every 6 or 7 weeks she'd go to a concert. And the minute she left a concert, she would book their next concert. So that's what she and her husband would go to a concert, they'd have a great time, and then on the way home, she would look online and things like that, and she would book their next concert tickets. She hasn't been to a concert since 2019 because that ritual of booking that next ticket stopped. And she said, I just can't, I don't know what's wrong. I start to look and I just don't have it. People used to gather in coffee shops and things like that, and some of that has gone away. I lost 3 years with my friends. Many of us changed in really important ways. It has to be intentional, because the things that we used to do to soothe ourselves and to soothe our brains, we do a lot of stuff for self-care for our bodies, but really thinking about that self-care for your brain, that very intentional, what is going to make my brain feel better right now? When you're struggling, when you're here, asking yourself, where are you? You can ask yourself right now, where am I from here to here right now? I'm looking at my next week ahead and I'm here, or I'm this, I'm that, and then what am I going to do about it? And you can ask the people in your family. And this is definitely a question we ask a lot. Like if I'm struggling, my husband will be like, where are you? My son knows, he comes home sometimes and he's like, I was here all day. I'm like, okay. He'll send me a picture of his hand like this and be like, can you please come pick me up? Something bad is going to happen. These ability for us to communicate how we're doing in a way that feels non-judgmental is really important, because admitting that you're struggling often feels like weakness. I have a billion friends that will ask me in a heartbeat for a physical therapist when their ankle hurts. But when their brain is struggling, so I'm part of this large group in the town that we have about 1,000 people on this group. We call it the Cucumbers. It's very strange. We all met up over cucumber margaritas, and now there's like 1,000 we exchange things. But people will ask all the time, my ankle hurts, this is happening, I have breast cancer, my husband's prostrate. Like, we'll talk about anything. No holds barred. But people will email me and say, can you please post anonymously? I'm looking for a therapist for my son. My husband's having a hard time with anxiety. Can you post and see if anybody will private message me? Happy to talk about his testicles, terrified to talk about his brain. That's a real challenge that we have in our communities. Because there's never been a time in history when people's brains have been so challenged by the world around them, and when the support has been more needed. And we don't quite know how to do it. I have a friend whose son has schizophrenia and has dealt with addiction. He used addiction to self-medicate for schizophrenia. And the last time he went into the hospital, she messaged me and said, I wish he had cancer. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, I'm so tired. And if he had cancer, people would help me. Somebody would bring me a casserole. People would ask if they could walk our dogs. But because he has an addiction and schizophrenia, people pretend he doesn't exist anymore. We've done something to ourselves as a community, as a society. In one of the hardest times in history, we've made it the hardest to ask for help and look for support. At a time when we are willing to talk about any other part of our body. I mean, there was a time where if you had breast cancer, people would whisper. Now you can wear the button and the this and the that, and we talk about all these things that used to be verboten. So this is science. There are chemicals in our brain and in our bodies, and we can hack them. So we can make I can say to myself, I feel anxious, which means I have too much cortisol and adrenaline. In order to wash out cortisol and adrenaline, I can take deep breaths, I can go for a walk, I can get more oxytocin going on, I can kick up a little bit of serotonin. And this is when I work with youth. This is a lot of the work that I do with youth, is to demystify Feelings are not nebulous. They come directly from the chemicals and hormones that are released in our body. And when we understand the chemicals and hormones that are released in our body, we can have a very different perception of what it means to, when I'm anxious, I can think, oh, that's so interesting. I wonder why I'm releasing cortisol and adrenaline right now. It doesn't totally make sense to me, but what I know is in order to deal with this, I need to take some deep breaths and get some of that oxytocin out. I need to eat some healthy food. I need to do these other things to clear it out. It's not a weakness. It's just a natural response to something that is in my environment that I'm struggling with. So this is the part that is super awesome and super sucks. You get to decide. If you want to move through the world feeling more happy and more comfortable, you can. Because so this quote is, I just woke up one day and decided I didn't want to feel like that anymore or ever again, so I changed. Just like that. And the decision that you get to make on a regular basis is, how much power am I going to give this person? How much control am I going to allow them to have over my emotions and my feelings? And how much of myself do I want to take away from the people I love in order to support this person? So when I was at work at DMH, I had somebody, obviously not Carol, who I was really struggling with. And I'd come every day with a story about them and how unfair they were and how this. And finally my husband said, how much power are you planning on giving this person? And it stopped me in my tracks. Because by letting them put me like this all the time, and I just stopped. And every time I'd start to do this, I'd be like, nope, she doesn't get to do that. Nope, she doesn't get to do that. I literally put, like, all of her emails went into a folder. So there are concrete things you can do. So all of her emails, because her emails used to make me like this, I would put them all into one, they went into a folder. And I would schedule on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would take 10 minutes and look at her emails and respond to them, and that's it. Because the other weird thing about life now, and certainly our young people are seeing it a ton, everybody has access to you all the time. I grew up in a time where if your friend wanted to get in touch with you, they either had to call you on the phone that was downstairs that everybody else had access to, or come to your door. That was it. And if your parents decided they didn't want you to have any more phone calls, or if they felt like so-and-so wouldn't be good for you to talk to that night, they would just unplug the phone from the wall and take it to bed with them. My friend's father, Missy's father, who was a police officer, he was a single dad, very rare thing in those days, but I can distinctly remember me, Missy, and one of our other friends sleeping over there. And he went to bed at 8 o'clock at night because he worked early, and he would unplug the phone, the only phone, and take it with him to bed. And we would be like, but what if there's an emergency? And he'd be like, I'm a cop. If there's an emergency, come get me. If I'm dead, go next door. They're cops too. It was a very simple world. You know, I talked to a teenager the other day one of my friend's kids who was going to go to a sleepover. And I went over and I was like, hey, Maddie, I thought you were going to sleepover. And she said, oh, I didn't want to do my hair, my makeup, and everything. And I said, why would you do your hair and makeup to go to a sleepover? And she said, because people will be taking pictures and they'll post them. And if I look like an idiot in the pictures, then people will make fun of me and they'll have that picture forever and all these other things. And again, that's that piece of stress that we never had to deal with. When I went to a sleepover, you went in, halftime, you went in your pajamas, with your hair sticking up straight. You acted like goofs. Nobody took a picture because you know where the camera was? It was up in the closet. And you had to ask your parents, and they probably didn't have a flash bulb for it. There was no film loaded. And even if you did take a picture, it was like another 6 months before that roll of film got finished. And they might go develop it. The level of intensity was so low. The level of, if I got a bad grade, if I wasn't at school, they weren't going to be able to tell me. I wasn't going to get a bad grade coming up on my computer on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. find out, oh my God, it's Saturday at 2 o'clock and I just found out I got a D. And now my mom just found out I got a D. And now the level of stress, the intensity is constant and overwhelming because people have access to us all the time. Bullying. People used to only be able to bully you when you were right there. They couldn't record it and send it to someone else and all these other things. And actually, because most people are really bad at describing things, bullying was less effective. Because being like, hey, I saw Joe yesterday and he had soup and then he like tripped and he kind of fell over, but the soup, you had to kind of be there, but the soup went over here and all these other things is a lot less engaging than a recording of somebody tripping that can be shared and altered and shared. It's a different world and we have to move through it differently because what we used to do is no longer effective. It's no longer effective to just be able to prepare yourself for a meeting with somebody you struggle with when they can email you and text you at any time. When we're expected to be available 24/7. When everything's supposed to be turned around like this. So if you make a decision, I don't like this, you need to change something because nobody else will. Many of us are sitting here waiting for other people to get it together so that we can be happy. Like if everybody at work would just get their stuff together, I would be happy. Well, I don't want to wait for that anymore. So intentional implementation, and piece around intentional implementation that I actually think a lot about because again, I have problems prioritizing myself, is that I have a husband and a child that I adore. And I want for them to experience the best me that they can because we're not here forever. And I think about that sometimes. Like I think about is it worth me being irritated and angry and bringing it home to my family and maybe spending a whole evening not interacting with them? What if we didn't have a lot of those left? Now, I'm a Buddhist. I believe we come back over and over again, but I know I only have one chance with these people in this body. So this piece around the intentional implementation, if you can't do it for yourself, then think about the people around you that you care for and how you want them to experience you. You know, when I talk to teachers, I do a lot of talking to teachers, and one of the things I say to the teachers is, what do you want people to think of when they think of you? What are 3 words? And they can all easily choose. I want them to think that I'm kind, and I'm open, and I'm committed. And I'm like, okay, that's great. Are those the words people currently use? Because who you want to be and who you are often very different. And you get to decide. We get to decide how we're experienced by the people around us by controlling that experience. I love this quote. It's okay to be tired, but you have to learn to rest. Not give up, not quit, but rest and recharge and figure out how to move forward differently. May your cortisol levels stay low. May your dopamine levels stay high. May your oxytocin run thick and rich. Your serotonin build to a lovely plateau. And your ability to watch your brain at work keep you fascinated until your last breath. I wish you well on your journey. One of the things, so I'd love to kind of have a little bit of conversation at this point around how we do things differently. And Kristen Neff, who's a really amazing, if you want to read a book that is potentially transformational and is actually a really easy read, Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, wrote a book called Self-Compassion. And it's a framework that really just asks us to be as kind to ourselves as we would be to a stranger, someone else. And that idea really says that when we have problems, we should seek to support ourselves in those problems as opposed to blame ourselves and hurting ourselves for those problems. When we've made a mistake, it's okay. People make mistakes. If I come to you and I say, you know what, I'm the worst mother ever. I didn't plan anything for spring vacation. I forgot to pack my kid lunch. I'm a disaster. I am like the worst mom. I don't even know why I had kids. Now, would you ever let someone else say that to themselves without interrupting them? what would you say? What would you say to me?
You are a good person, you are a good mother. I bet you raised a great son, a great husband.
Yeah. You're doing your best. And really, that's the question I ask people all the time. Are you doing your best? Because if you're doing your best, that's all you can do. And your best changes from day to day. But the intentional implementation really is about, first of all, deciding to check in with yourself. So whatever piece you're going to do, I did a positivity class, and this woman came up to me about a week later. I saw her in the hallway, and she was like, damn it. I was like, what? She was like, I went to your positivity class last week, and I haven't been positive one day. I said, okay, well, I'm really sorry to hear that. What did you do to start becoming positive? And she said, I went to your class. And I said, okay, but after that? And she was like, well, isn't that enough? And I was like, I went to step aerobics once, 5 years ago. If you don't do anything after that one class, it doesn't work. I hate to tell you. None of this stuff works without practice. None of this stuff works without intentionality. And in the same way that if you decide that you're going to eat healthy, you need to go to the store and buy different foods. You need to plan time. If you decide you want to think in a way that's healthy, you need to have different experiences. You need to insert different thought processes. And that's not just for ourselves, it's for the people around us, because the magic of this is that you can teach it to one another. And I'm really lucky in that I've been kind of practicing this for the entire time that my child has been alive. And so now I have a kid who occasionally pulls it out on me. I'll be in traffic and I'll be kind of complaining about the person in front of me, and he'll be like, Mom, that could be a student driver. That could be that person's first time on the highway. And when it's my first time on the highway, would you want someone to be tailgating me? You're right. That could totally be someone's first time on the highway. It could be someone who hasn't driven in a long time. It could be someone who's overwhelmed. It could be someone who's frustrating. And honestly, giving people the benefit of the doubt makes us feel better. When we look at the people around us and assume that they are jerks, we feel worse about the world. When we look at the people around us and assume that they are doing their best, we feel better about the world. If the person who's doing the Dunkin' Donuts line is a disaster and it's taking 5 days, rather than being like, why does no one cares about their job anymore, no one does anything, to say to yourself, they're probably understaffed, they're probably overwhelmed. Being mean to them is in no way going to make that better. And it doesn't make me feel better. When I'm mean to people all day long, do I feel good when I got home? No. When I'm angry at my family, I don't feel better. That's just one more thing I have to make up for later. So really thinking about that intentionality, what are you going to do differently? How are you going to check in with yourself? And then how do you build in things that increase the amount of time that you feel okay about things? We all have problems. And the vast majority of times, you can identify the problem, figure out what's going on, determine what you can do about it in that moment, and then that's all you can do. I have kind of a gross phrase that I use for this. I've been using it. I did a lot of speeches last week and the week before in Maine and New Hampshire and all over the place, and I said it's kind of like chewing poop gum. Why would you do that? Why would you just keep thinking about something awful that's uncomfortable over and over and over and over again? But we do it all the time. We have somewhere around 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, and about 80% of them are negative. Now, part of that is because we're hardwired to look for potential danger. So we're hardwired to think that the thing in the bush is going to eat us, not become our best friend. But in order for us to move through this world, we have to do things differently, because the way that caveman's life was very different. They had these long spaces of just comfort. So I lived in West Africa for 2 years. I was a lay midwife in a very small village in West Africa, very, very far out, no running water, no electricity, no nothing. And what I learned is that the vast majority of time, people were just kind of hanging out and bored. You know, you did your work, you went out, worked hard, you worked in the fields, but there were no surprises. There were no sudden stresses. There were no sudden changes. For weeks at a time, new people couldn't even show up because the roads were washed out. There was a radio, but it didn't go back and forth, so all you got was kind of information. So your life was, it would be like if you went to a cabin out in the woods with no internet and no phone. And once a week, someone came and brought you mail. How would life feel different if you did that? How would life feel different?
Less stress.
Yeah, like
It would take getting used to. I'd be stressed.
it would take getting used to, but you know why it would take getting used to? Because your poor beaten up brain, your poor beaten up brain is used to being distressed at all times. And so we actually have created lots and lots of people who prefer to be distressed and actually don't do well when things are calm and okay. That's a really hard way to live. So I guess what I hope that you'll take away is this idea that we get to choose how we experience the world. When I met my husband 18 years or so ago, he's a Taoist, which is an Eastern religion, very, very calm. He is the most calm human. And when I met him, I practiced a religion that you may be familiar with. It's called anxiety. That was my religion. I was the high priestess of the religion. There's probably statues of me somewhere. And so I would go around buzzing with anxiety. You know, remember I was this this woman who was going to Harvard and taking foster babies with me and like living and working and all these other things. Like I was constantly like this. And one day I was like, you know what? When you do this, you make me feel. And he said, I just want to stop you because I actually don't make you feel anything. Situations occur and you choose your response. And I went, kablam, that is the most ridiculous thing that anyone's ever said. And if you cannot take responsibility for the way you impact the people around you, I do not know if this thing, but just the idea that I was doing this to myself. Somebody sends you an email that says, as I said in my last email, and you get angry. That's your decision. You could just as easily look at that and be like, oh, thank you for reminding me of that. I did see that. So sorry I missed that. Thanks for reminding me. Have a great day. It's the decisions that we make about how we perceive what happens around us that determine how we feel the vast majority of the time. I hope that you are well. Again, I hope your cortisol levels are low. I hope your oxytocin runs thick. My website is relentlesspositivity.org. There's information about this and lots of other stuff there if you want to read about it. If anybody has any questions, this is a good time for it. And if not, I certainly wish you well along the road, and I hope that,
Yeah, so I don't have a question exactly, but just a couple of comments. So when you were talking about everyone on Facebook posting just the happy things, and I certainly do that. But I have a relative of a relative, a sister-in-law's sister,
yeah,
who regularly posts about her bad day and how crappy she feels, and she doesn't have to go to bed early because she's sick of everything and so on. And as you were speaking, I was thinking, and she's so truthful.
she's so truthful. So there are people who only post negative things. I guess what I really look for is people that we recognize that what we're seeing is not the truth. So people can post whatever they want, but we need to recognize that what we're seeing is a carefully curated glimpse of people's lives and not judge ourselves against it, because I look at people's living rooms and I think, why is their living room so clean? They have 2 kids. Why is it never a mess? I don't understand. We don't have, when my mother had us when she was very young, but she lived in Navy housing. She was very, very young, and they all were in and out of each other's houses constantly. Like they basically raised kids together. And maybe some of you had that experience too. So you knew what people's houses looked like. You know, you knew that their living room was sometimes messy and their kitchen got to be a mess and then it got cleaned again and then it got to be a mess and then it got cleaned again. We only enter people's worlds when we're invited now. And people carefully prepare for our presence, which leads us to believe that everyone else's life is perfectly curated and clean at all times, and we are the disaster. We don't have the access. We used to know everything about everybody happening in the community. You know, that this one was brother having a hard time with the drink, and this one's sister was kind of leaving home but not doing this, and you were like, everybody has problems. Mine are no better, no worse. We don't have that intimacy anymore. It's a very hard place to be.
So I have twins that are 17 at the high school. Twins that are 17 at the high school. I don't think that's working.
It's connected to the camera.
Oh, for the TV, sorry. Twins that are 17 at the high school and a 20-year-old in college. They're always on social media. How do I talk to them about the social media and maybe downing it a little bit?
So I think part of that piece, it is, so social media is addictive. It's like any other addiction. So we get the same burst of just like any, literally, cigarettes, all that other stuff. If one of us, so you have your phone there, if you were to leave your phone at home for the day, would you be uncomfortable?
Yes. Yeah.
Most of us would be. And the reality is we're like, oh, emergency, emergency. The likelihood that there is an emergency that you are going to need to be called in is almost zero. And if it was that big of an emergency, somebody would find you. We're addicted. And so really, talking to youth about this idea of addiction is important. Talking to people about reminding them this is not reality. And also kind of setting those limits around how you kind of move through the way other people impact you. But I will tell you, again, I'm going to say it again, I think it's probably the hardest time in history to be a young person. And the more that we can talk about the fact that it is okay to be struggling and that to tell somebody, you know, that you have this social media stuff, if it's making you feel bad, talk to somebody. Talk to me. If you were limping like this, you would talk to somebody. And I would take you to physical therapy and you wouldn't be like, everybody limps, it's fine. So that's that piece that I just remind people, like we should be able to walk comfortably and we should be able to think comfortably. We should be able to breathe comfortably. It shouldn't hurt when you pee. You know, there's just these things that human beings should be able to do and we should be able to talk about. And the brain comfort is the one that we tend to not talk about that much. We deserve to be comfortable in our brain. And it's not unusual to not be comfortable. And there are things that we can do that can bring us back to that point. It's not unusual to have a broken bone. There are things that we have to do. If you never treated a broken bone, bad things would happen. That's why we treat it. If you never treat pain in your mind, bad things happen. It's just a part of your body. It's a chunk of your body. We need to stop mythologizing it and treating it like it's some abstract thing. It's not. It's a chunk of your body. Sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't.
So I have a question. I like the use of the term brain
Yep.
because I can picture brain health.
Yeah.
And like you said, we don't have a mental, we have a brain. So I like that. And there's still stigma. It's better somewhat, but there's still stigma around mental health issues, asking for help, getting treatment. So is there a movement to change that term from mental health to
There has
brain
been.
health?
So this partially came, one of the people that was really pushing it was somebody who did a lot of work after Sandy Hook. So it's part of Sandy Hook Promise, really talking about brain health. We are the movement. You know, we are the movement. We are the people that talk about it. I talk about the fact that I take medication for my brain. You know, I had, you know, the way that my genetics worked and things like that, it was very unlikely that I was not going to need to take some sort of medication to make this work correctly. You know, if I had a child and lots of people in his family were diabetic, then I would tell my child, there's a possibility that as you grow up, you may find that you're really thirsty and you may find that sometimes you feel dizzy. If those things happen, just let me know. and we'll go to a doctor and we'll deal with it, because people in your family have diabetes. And I've said to my son, there may come a time in your life when you feel like you're kind of stressed out and worried all the time, and you're worried about things that you don't really feel like are worth worrying about, and you're overwhelmed. And if that happens, you should come tell me, and we'll go to a doctor and we'll fix it, because people in your family have anxiety. It's just that simple. And it's just that non-stigmatizing when we're able to talk about it. We have to be aggressive about it. We've gotten aggressive in every other genetic thing. There are people who have parts of their body removed preemptively. I believe that there will be time when we will begin treating some of these things preemptively. We'll understand enough about the brain, enough about the levels of chemicals and hormones. We'll do enough fMRIs to really understand what a brain looks like when it's healthy and what a brain looks like when it needs more support. But we have to be willing to talk about it first. Yeah. He's coming.
I don't know if I heard this right, but did you say like most of us have like 80% during the day, 80% of our thoughts can be negative towards ourselves?
Negative in general.
Negative in general.
Yeah, we have what's called a negativity a bias. And in some ways it was protective. Remember we said like we had to assume that something bad might happen so we would protect ourselves. But now we assume it for everything. So if I'm driving and there's traffic, I don't assume, wow, everyone around me is also struggling to get home, and something's happening ahead of us and we're not quite sure what it is, but collectively we're really working to try to move forward. That's not how I think. I think there's some idiot up there who doesn't know how to drive and got in an accident. If everybody would just, we have that negativity piece. We assume that people, the people in the store are trying to get away with something, and the serviceman's going to take our money, and this, that, and everything. It's not true. It's just not true. We also have all these, the Facebook and all this stuff also shares all these bad experiences that people have. Not a lot of positivity. Assuming the best intentions of others, assuming that other people are doing their best, is one of the most positive things that you can do. When I was really struggling with negativity and anxiety, I would make myself do positive things. So if I was in the bank and I was like, God, why is that woman up there taking forever? If she can't figure out how to deposit a check, she needs to leave. Then I'd be like, Charity, that was awful. Now you need to think of 5 positive things about standing in line in the bank. And I would be like, I'm glad that I have money in the bank. Aren't I lucky that I can stand here? I'm glad that the teller is taking so much time with that woman, because at some point in my life, I too will be of an age where I will need additional assistance to work with some of the technological things. Like, that's part of retraining. If you want your legs to be stronger, you do squats. If you want your brain to be more grateful, you practice gratitude. It's very doable. So, that piece around kind of just making the decision to do it. And the question is, do you want to be happier? Nope, I'm good the way I am. I do not want to be happier. Okay, go on with your bad self. But if you do, then the amazing thing is that there are small changes that you can make. If you spend a lot of time in traffic and by the time you get home you're angry and upset, then you can put 2 Post-it notes on your dashboard. And one of those Post-it notes can say he's trying to get to his sick mother in the hospital. And the other Post-it note can say she really has to go to the bathroom. Those are 2 things that I have a great deal of empathy for. And so if someone cuts me off, instead of being like, that person's an idiot and they hate me and all this, I'm gonna be like, I hope your mother gets better. And I hope you find a bathroom. Everyone's just doing the best they can with what they have. And the more we can think that about ourselves and one another, the kinder we'll be to ourselves and each other. And we can't do any better than that. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. I'm here if people have questions. Otherwise, thank you so much. To Carol and to the others from here, thank you very much.